where we'll talk about the perspectives of the employers as well as career advising. And then we have three wonderful recent alumni who graduated into this different world of pandemic in this last year and who had studied abroad and who can talk really about what it's like right now to be thinking about leveraging those study abroad experiences and making those connections. And so we're going to start with just introductions of everyone. We'll hear a little bit from Tanya then about the career center's perspective, and then we'll have some questions for our panelists and that just to get us started, and then we'll open up conversation more broadly. This session is recorded for the panelists participating, so if you have a question, please put it in the chat screen, and then we will ask those questions of the panelists in the later part of the session. So with that, let's get started. Which one of our alums would like to start? And it's just so lovely to see you, even if it's virtually. Can't wait to welcome you back on campus. But who wants to start with just a brief introduction?
Sure, I'd be happy to start. So my name is Carter, and I just graduated May 2020 with a degree in international relations. On campus, I was active in Salsa Club, and I worked for the president's office. Fall 2018, thanks to the extreme generosity of the Reeves Center, especially the Robert M. Gates Scholarship, and also the Department of State's Gillen Scholarship, I was lucky enough to be able to study abroad in Rabat, Morocco, through a third-party program called CIEE, the Council on International Educational Exchange. I lived with a local family and studied Arabic, French, and Middle Eastern Northern African politics, histories, religions, and cultures. Summer 2019, again, supported by the generosity of the Reeves Center, I worked for the U.S. Department of State at the U.S. mission to NATO at NATO headquarters in Brussels. After graduating last May, I joined Booz Allen Hamilton, a top Washington, D.C. federal management consulting firm, where I currently support the Office of the Secretary of Defense. To conclude my intro, study abroad has profoundly impacted my life and my career and has opened up so many opportunities for me. And I'm very, very excited to be here today to talk about it.
I can go next because a lot of my experience is actually mirrored Carter's. I'm Grace Kyer. I graduated also in May of 2020 with a degree in Russian and a degree in government. And I studied abroad twice with William & Mary, first in the summer of 2018 in St. Petersburg on a William & Mary sponsored exchange at the St. Petersburg State University. And I lived with a host family. And then in fall of 2018, I was also a Gates Scholar. And I also studied abroad with CIEE, but in Moscow, Russia, at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, which is one of the premier universities in Russia, and I lived in dorms there and studied with Russian students. And currently I work at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace as a junior fellow on the Russia-Eurasia program. So I provide support for a variety of different scholars within Carnegie, which is a global think tank located primarily in Washington, but also has centers globally, including in Moscow. And for me, study abroad really has impacted my career trajectory very clearly. In particular, it gave me the opportunity to focus on Russian area studies very broadly and in a lot of detail when I was in Moscow as well as St. Petersburg, and it allowed me to work on my Russian language skills particularly.
Hi everyone, my name is Ifechi. Sorry if you can hear my roommate's dog in the background. So I graduated in spring of 2019. And I majored in public policy and French at William & Mary. I studied abroad spring 2018. And then when I came back, I actually became a study abroad peer advisor. So obviously study abroad meant a lot to me and still means a lot to me. I studied abroad in Brussels, Belgium, and I worked at a NGO called Caritas International, which is an NGO for refugees who just arrived in Belgium, and it's also in other places in Europe. Right now, I work at the Orleans Public Defender's Office as an investigator, and study abroad profoundly impacted my career choice. It's one of the reasons why I got my internship at the Public Defender's Office in DC, which is how I got the job I have now. And so I'm really excited to talk about it. I haven't talked about study abroad in a long time, so I'm really excited to be here.
Great, thank you so much for those introductions. We look forward to the conversation. Tanya.
Yes, I work for the Cohen Career Center. I'm the Director of Career Advising and Assessment. and have been with William and Mary since 2018. I did a study abroad as well, but it's been quite a long time ago. The world was much different, but it did open my eyes, and I can relate to the many skills that you acquire from such an experience. Now, Sylvia, with that said, do you want me to launch into my brief remarks about the value of study abroad? Okay, thank you. We'll segue into that. I prepared 3 questions and have some answers for why it's of such value for your career advancement. So the first question is, what does the data say? And so folks are still quoting the 2016 QS Global Employer Survey report because it was just so large. It showed that 6 out of 10 employers around the world give extra credit for international student experience, and more than 80% said they actively sought graduates who had studied abroad. Now, I belong to a professional group, National Association of Colleges and Employers, and it's a blend of career services around the nation, college career services, and recruiters at different companies that do specifically college recruiting for employment. And they say that 49% of recent grads are reported to have gotten their jobs within 12 months of graduation, compared to 97%, that's the general population, compared to 97% of the study abroad alumni. So it's like your chances of getting a job in your field after graduation double with the study abroad experience, more than double. And then salaries, that's another data point. With study abroad experience, the data shows salary offers tend to be about $7,000 higher. So that's another, like I said, data point that is interesting. And that leads us to our second question. Why? Well, I'll drop a link in the chat that shares the different NACE competencies, but that's what it boils down to. The studying internationally allows students to develop key competencies sought by employers. And the top 4, I teased them out of the list because there are more than 4 competencies. One happens to be perspective, and that's in the form of global and intercultural fluency. And through this link that I drop in the chat, you'll be able to see how employers define that. Another one of the top 4, courage and self-sufficiency in the form of your own personal career management. The third one, critical thinking, problem solving. And then the 4th one, advanced social skills. That's interesting. It's in the form of your professionalism and your work ethic. So is it enough just to list, the third question I have prepared, is it enough just to list the experience on your resume, on your LinkedIn profile, have it on your transcript? Short answer, no. The Lonsdale Institute in Melbourne, they say by making the decision to study abroad, you ultimately have a positive impact on your future employability. So employers want you to not only list it, but be able to convey the lessons or prove what you've learned or acquired. And you do this in multiple ways: during an interview, on an application essay, in a cover letter, LinkedIn profile, part of your digital portfolio, as some fields require, through references. So I'll pause there and let you ponder those points while I submit the links. I'll have to sign off around 12:50 for a career chat with an employer, and I will leave my email address if you'd like to get in touch with me and ask questions. I'll be glad to meet with you. Thank you, Sylvia.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Tanya, and for providing the perspective both of an employer as well as from a career advising. So with that, we just had a few questions to get us started about experiences for our alumni panelists. So you've talked a little bit in your introduction about the impact of study abroad, just very, very quickly on your career. But could you expound on that a little bit? How has study abroad impacted your career? This could be your career choice, internships leading up to it, job opportunities, did it come up in interviews, or even in your daily work today? So however you want to answer that. Anyone want to get us started?
I can start. So in terms of career choice, I always knew I wanted to do something in the social justice realm, but I always thought I wanted to do it on a macro level, in terms of like advocacy or, you know, general public policy. But it wasn't until I studied abroad, um, through IFE. I don't think I said that, but I did IFE. It's 6 weeks of classes at the beginning and then a 12-week internship. And at my internship, I did a research project in French. And then I also got to, because my research project, I got to interact with some of the refugees in terms of helping them find housing. And it showed me that I want to do social justice on a macro level, on a micro level, working with individuals directly. And that's why I ended up working at the public defender's office. And the skills I learned in terms of client communication, confidence, speaking up in a foreign language, really helped me in terms of confidence speaking in my own native language. And so, yeah, in terms of skills of research, client communication, confidence, self-sufficiency were all things that I learned in study abroad and things that I always talk about in interviews to this day.
I can go next. So when I was in Moscow, I also decided I wanted to intern at a variety of different organizations that I was looking at. And the one that I eventually landed on was called the Peer Center, which is a Russian think tank. And my boss at the Peer Center asked me which topic I wanted to research. And they did all sorts of different international security and domestic security issues. And I said, I really wanted to do cybersecurity. And I was really interested in cyber issues. And he said, great, how about you start researching nuclear arms treaties, which was something I knew nothing about and was really kind of taken aback. And I said, sure, that sounds really interesting. And I really, really was taken by this field, and it's a really interesting field for me. And that was something that I wouldn't have ever sought out on my own and ever have considered doing on my own. And so that showed me really the importance of being very flexible and very open-minded, which is something that I think when you're in another country and you're studying abroad is kind of comes to the forefront, because you have to be flexible. You have to have an open mind. You have to have a different perspective. And then when I was interning at the think tank, like I said, I was really interested in these subjects I was working on. So I applied for another internship at a US think tank, also working on nuclear arms issues, which I did in the summer of 2019. And then I actually applied for my current position at the Carnegie Endowment for their nuclear policy program. And I thought I was going to work on the nuclear issues. And they said, how about you do the Russia program instead? And I said, that sounds great. And again, coming back to that flexibility, that ability to be open-minded and to consider a lot of different paths and not saying, no, that's not what I'm interested in, and just shutting something down because you don't have experience. And so I think it's the ability to kind of do that baseline level research, that baseline to kind of come up to the baseline on what you're working on, while also keeping an open mind about what you could be interested in and what you could be interested in working on. Because I definitely wouldn't be in my current position if I had said, no, I don't want to work at this think tank in Moscow. And so that's what I would kind of come back to, is just, keep an open mind when you're abroad, and obviously, be safe, be thoughtful about what you're doing while you're studying abroad. But I think just kind of have an open mind and take a lot of the opportunities that are presented to you, because they're things that are very unique regardless of where you're studying.
So piggybacking off of all of that and what Tanya said, I'll tell you a story. Study abroad always comes up in interviews, and sometimes you might be interviewing while you're studying abroad. So for instance, I was on a class trip to the mountains, the Atlas Mountains in southern Morocco, and I got an email from some guy at the State Department saying, hey, we got your application. We'd love to interview you. How about tomorrow at like 4:30 p.m.? I said, well, we're kind of in the we're going to be in the mountains traveling. Is there any way we can postpone? He said, nope. We got one day to interview. That's the Friday. Monday, we make decisions. Tuesday, we tell you. And then Wednesday, you have to get your decision back to us. So I said, okay, we'll try and figure something out. And so we still went to the mountains, but I talked to my people on my study abroad program, and we're like, hey, I have this interview. Can we, figure something out? And they're like, yes, of course. We'll make it happen. So we're at the mountains. We're getting like maybe half an hour before when my interview is supposed to be. And they said, okay, we're going to start knocking on doors. Just random people's houses in the mountains of Morocco. first door we knocked on, they were like, yes, of course, we'd be happy to help. When they explained, oh, this guy has this interview, he needs some Wi-Fi. Do you have any? They're like, yes, of course. Like, here's our spare room. Here is some Wi-Fi. Here's the password. Here's some water. Here's some bread. You know, we're all praying for you. We really hope you get it. Even though I didn't really understand what it was. And I was like, wow, this is incredible. So I get on the phone and the guy knows I'm in the mountains somewhere. And he says, hey, how's the view? And I thought, it's pretty good. And so we had our, 10, 15-minute interview. And then at the end, he said, Carter, I have one more question for you. Were those chickens I heard in the background? And I said, yeah. And then he said, okay, thanks, we'll be in touch, and then hung up. I ended up getting the position. And then when I first met him and went to work with him, he said, oh yeah, it was the chickens that really, really told me you were the real deal. That's probably part of why I hired you. So, even the most inconvenient circumstances on a wonderful trip can really, really turn into something really valuable.
That's great. Thanks. Tanya, is there anything you'd like to add to any of those stories?
Carter and I have been through some adventures when it comes to lining up interviews, and he's right. They could call you on that experience. I'm not in the interviews with the students necessarily, but I get to hear the stories afterwards. And I agree, it comes up, and you can be the driver of that train and learn how to bring it up if they don't ask, if it's not on their radar, make it an important piece of that conversation. So you do have the power to do that. It is a conversation. Thanks for asking, Sylvia.
Thanks for that. So I'm very curious. Sometimes our careers can be very linear, where we think we know exactly where we want to go, and then sometimes they evolve. And obviously, you're early in your careers. But as Grace, you were talking a little bit about pivoting or just kind of, being flexible. Were you, going into your study abroad experience, how were you thinking about career or not, which is also okay, but what things do you think that you did that really kind of helped you maximize some of those skills beyond the, being really resilient with finding an, location for an interview, choosing a program perhaps with an internship or looking for one, but would just be really interested in hearing kind of some things that you did that therefore advise other students to do while you're abroad, choosing programs or while you're abroad.
One thing that was really important to me was picking a program that would allow me to work on my language skills. And I think that this is something that can be really valuable regardless of where you're studying abroad. Even if you're studying abroad in a country that speaks English primarily, I think it's really worthwhile to pursue language classes there. And so I think for me, I couldn't do my job on a regular basis without speaking Russian. I'm not fluent, but I'm pretty proficient, and I can read Russian and I can read Russian websites. And I think, and I know I wouldn't be able to do my job if I wasn't able to speak Russian to the degree that I am. And that's largely because I chose a program that had Russian language offerings and that had Russian tutoring as well. And so I would really encourage everyone listening, regardless of what your interests are, because like I said, I'm very interested in area studies and very interested in Russian studies, but I think it's really valuable to pursue language regardless of where you are, especially if you're in a country that doesn't speak English primarily. And so that was one thing I really got from my study abroad program. I was also looking for something that would give me kind of more of that real understanding of what it was like to live in Russia and what it was like to live with other Russian students. And one of the most valuable things to me was meeting other Russian students when I was meeting Russian students when I was in Russia, as well as other international students, because the university I was at had a lot of students from all over the world, Europe and Asia, and you name it, they had students from there. And it was really, really valuable to me to learn alongside them and to hear their perspectives on the world. And I was able to take that to my current position, where we're thinking about how do Russians, including Russians of our age group, view Putin? How do they view the Russian regime? How are they interested in, what are they going to do politically in the future? And that's something that I wasn't anticipating when I studied abroad initially, but I'm really, really grateful I was able to learn those views from Russian students. So I really encourage you to pursue programs that have a language component, if that's something you're interested in, and that also allow you to meet other students who aren't necessarily just from the United States. As valuable as that can be, I think it's really, really great to meet students from all over the world. And finally, I'll close by saying I think it's really great to look at kind of those overlooked places that I think we don't necessarily think about when we're choosing to study abroad. And like I said, I was a Russian major. I was really interested in it. You didn't have to have a big Russian background to study abroad in the program that I did. And there were a couple of students in my program who were very interested in business side things, and they were doing business internships. And so I think that it's really valuable to consider different countries that you might otherwise overlook when you're deciding where to study abroad.
I'd love to jump on that. So 100% agree. I think it's absolutely imperative that you choose a program that challenges you. So before I went to Morocco, I had a very, very basic understanding of a couple sentences and phrases in Arabic, but I didn't have any Arabic training at all. I had the French, which was useful, not as useful as I thought, but it was useful. But I went to Morocco because I wanted to just be thrown in and, be forced to learn the language really well. And while my formal Arabic isn't that great, with the local dialect, like that is what I really, really got down, because that's how everyone, that's how you order tea. That's the really important thing there. So choosing somewhere with a language, most programs, like I'd say in my program, I had maybe 27 people. Less than half of them had ever taken Arabic before. So it's a completely normal thing. And it really forces you to learn and grow. So I also highly, highly recommend picking somewhere with a language and picking somewhere that you may not think of initially.
I'll jump on that too. I agree about language being something like for me, I was a French major and I had been taking French since middle school. And so for me, I wanted to study abroad in a Francophone place, just to grow my confidence in the language. Like I could speak it and I could read it and I could write it, but I didn't feel confident. And so in that way, I just wanted to be thrown in. And I lived with two other working professionals. One was from Spain, one was from France, and then worked at a French NGO. And so I was completely thrown in and I was completely out of my comfort zone. But I mean, it was trial by fire. My French really improved. My confidence really improved. Not even at work, but also like socially, just getting comfortable speaking to people that I don't know. And that's been really valuable in my job, in terms of I have to knock on people's doors and ask them about, pretty traumatic experiences. And, I don't think I'd be able to do that, like that level of confidence and assertiveness and just general like weird social skills that I got when I was abroad. So, yeah.
Great, that's all super helpful. Tanya, anything you want to add for recommendations? I will put a plug in here for any of you who are thinking about studying abroad. We deeply value our partnership with the Career Center, not only for webinars like this, but also for pre-departure and returnee programming to kind of think about these things before and then afterwards. But Tanya, anything you want to add in terms of recommendations for how to maximize time abroad?
Well, I do provide a presentation on leveraging that time abroad, but it's usually after you've gotten back. And so that's a good question, Sylvia. Before you go and prep, I just want to pause and say, I put in the chat that I think the panel made some fantastic points. They showed courage, they jumped in, they were in a place that that wasn't, every day for them. It was different. And the employers really appreciate this. So if you're running to it, I think that's a good point beforehand. You're running to it, and I'm not going to say for the right reasons, because for good reasons, because there is no right and wrong. Different is different. Good is good, and there are multiple good decisions that you can make. I like what you said too about language, right? And well, all three of you talked about language. You're running to it for the reason of maybe improving your language skills, but then you uncover so much more. So that's another point. Be aware, be open beforehand, so that when opportunity knocks, because it doesn't only knock domestically, it knocks internationally, you're ready for it. As Carter pointed out too beforehand, have some of those materials ready that you can share with people when the opportunity knocks. That's another bit of advice. That's a bit on the practical side. And I'm trying to think of one more thing beforehand. You don't have, there's not a need to have everything planned out, right? I mean, of course, you want your airline tickets, you want your agenda, your orientation, who your key people, you know, that you're going to contact. You want those logistical matters planned out, but leave a little room for exploration. I think some of the greatest experiences come from something that wasn't planned. And so I hope that doesn't go against any messages that are being shared here too. I just hope it supplements what's being shared. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's the unpredictableness of international travel and being in places, and that flexibility and resilience that we consistently hear from returnees and alumni as being one of the biggest impacts. On that note, are there any experiences that you feel were really challenging when you were abroad that now kind of in retrospect have you think and kind of help you in whether it be through resiliency or even more directly tied to your career? Because we know that part of study abroad, as in life in general, can be challenging and that we can sometimes grow through those opportunities as well.
Yeah, I can say something. So one of the things that very few people will ever tell you before you go study abroad is that it can be lonely. It can be very, very lonely because not everyone in the world is super friendly to you, and not every program is going to have a bunch of new best friends for you. So I think one of the really, really important things to do is learn to just be with yourself. Learn to be with yourself just at peace, because you can't always depend on having this close network of friendships or family or whatnot around you. And so I think that's really, really a big part of resiliency that study abroad will teach you, because you are there. You maybe have your host family and they're wonderful, but it's you. And I think learning to live with yourself is just incredibly important. I think study abroad really, really hammered that home for me.
Probably a lesson particularly useful now as you're working from home, kind of in everyone in their own little pods, right?
I would also say, I think it's really important when you're studying abroad to do things that scare you a lot. And Carter talked about this a little bit earlier about, picking a place to study abroad that you feel like will really challenge you and make you grow. And I every study abroad program, I'm sure, including the Reef Center, talks about like the core comfort zone and then the stretch zone where you're like pushing yourself, and then the panic zone, which are like, you shouldn't go to the panic zone. You've pushed too far. You've done something you shouldn't do. And when I was studying abroad in Moscow, I'm a big figure skating fan. I cannot figure skate, but I love to watch figure skating. And there was like a major competition happening when I was there. And I was really, really afraid about going. I was like, I don't know how to get there. I don't know where it is. Like, is my Russian good enough? Are my tickets good enough? How am I even going to print my tickets? Because I don't have a printer in my dormitory. And I eventually told myself, I was like, I have to go. Because I really want to see this competition. And I did go, and it was fabulous. And I had like the best time. And I remember afterwards, one of the skaters who was competing was Japanese, and he's very, very popular. And there were hundreds of Japanese fans there as well. And afterwards, they were all on the metro with me, and they like didn't know anything about the stops and stuff because they didn't speak any Russian, but they all spoke English. So I was able to help them figure out where they were going and figure out where their hotels were. And I just had a fabulous time. And it was because I was able to kind of do this thing that really scared me. And so I think that taking advantage of those opportunities, and, again, not doing anything dangerous, not doing anything that puts you in the panic zone so you're just completely shutting down, but doing the things that scare you, even if you just do the things that scare you, because you can really reap a lot of rewards.
Like Grace and Carter said, study abroad, I always thought I was a very independent person, but it wasn't until study abroad that I was like, okay, like I can really do this, by myself. I'm very close with my family, but I was really nervous studying abroad, being away from them for so long. And so study abroad really gave me a huge sense of independence and confidence. And that's one reason that I ended up like deciding to move here to New Orleans and work at the public defender's office here, which was a really big deal in my family. I knew that this was the right position for me in terms of how I wanted to grow professionally. And so I don't think without study abroad, I would have had the confidence and sense of independence to move here and start my career. So yeah.
Great. Thank you for that feedback. It is right. Sometimes the challenges that can allow us, and certainly in this world right now. So we've had a question, which is a perfect segue to some of the more kind of what kinds of programs there are and what opportunities there are. So the question was, hi, I wanted to know if the study abroad programs come with the internship positions or if you had to find those yourself. And again, I always say that study abroad at William & Mary is kind of hard to talk about, in part because there are hundreds of different options and they're all different, which on the one hand allows, for real customization and for you to find something that really meets your needs. On the flip side, it's hard to talk about without really getting granular. But part of what I'm excited about for this panel is that answer actually depends. Some programs do have it built in. So I don't know if you'd be willing to talk about the IFE model a little bit more. I know you mentioned it. Others, it's not a formal part of the program, but maybe there are resources that might help you. So I'd love to also hear, Grace, because I know you got an internship abroad, and then Carter maybe talking about how you found that other internship connected, the NATO one. Yeah, so that allows us to talk. So maybe in that spirit, if you want to also describe a little bit your programs a little bit more, just so that for our audience to understand better the kind of variety of different programs. And I know, Grace, you actually participated in 2 very different models of programs as well. So do you get us started since you,
yeah, so I'll start. So like I said before, I was a study abroad peer advisor. So when I saw that question, I was like, oh, what are the different programs? But yeah, so I chose IFE. It stands for Internships in Francophone Europe. But I think now they also have some in Spain. So that's exciting. So if you do IFE, you can choose between Paris, Strasbourg, or Brussels. For all of them, you start with 6 weeks of classes, then you have a week off. Most people use that week off to travel. And then a 12-week internship. Going into the application process, you can sort of, you can say what kind of internship you want. And then once you get in, it can be more tailored. And so I chose IFE because I knew I'd be really challenged in terms of my French fluency and mastering the language. So that's why I chose it. I was also really interested in that it was a guaranteed internship. And that they would find it for me, which was really fun and easy for me. But I do think that there could have been a sense of more independence if I could have chosen my internship myself, like Grace, and searched for it. But yeah, so that's why I chose IFE. It was also sponsored by the French department. I knew I would get my credits transferred, which was a nice reassurance going into study abroad. Yes, it's a great program. If anyone has any questions about it, please feel free to reach out.
So the summer program I did was a William & Mary sponsored program, which meant it was really nice because all my credits transferred as the classes that I took when I was in St. Petersburg. And we also lived with host families, and it was led by a William & Mary faculty member. And so I highly recommend the St. Petersburg program. Can't say enough good things about it. I assume they're planning on running it again this year, but I don't know. But that was a really great program. And you also had to have, I think, a baseline level of Russian, which I think was maybe 2 or 4 semesters of Russian to go on the program. And you also, of course, did the pre-study abroad class with the faculty member who was leading the trip to St. Petersburg. And it's all William & Mary students, which was a really nice experience. And it was really great to spend time with some of my favorite people from the US, like in another country. That was a really awesome experience and really allowed me to grow those friendships as well. And then the Moscow program I was the only William & Mary student. And I should caveat and say that this program, I think, no longer exists. I think it was suspended by CIEE because of the pandemic and financial concerns. But the program that I did, you took classes with other students at the university. You lived in a dormitory. My roommate was the only other American woman on my program. But you lived with a lot of international students and Russian students, and you take different classes in English besides the Russian language classes. And the internship that I decided to do, so you don't have to do it. It's not like it's not a mandatory thing like IFE, but you have to tell your advisor that you want to do it. And then she placed me and the one other student who wanted to do it in my year. And so she kind of took into consideration what we were interested in, and he wanted to do a much more business oriented path, and she placed him. And this was a huge stress reliever because finding a Russian internship is not something I would want to do on my own for a variety of different reasons. Most of all, I wasn't getting paid at all, but there's a lot of legal concerns and visa concerns in Russia in particular. So I highly recommend CIEE. Like I said, this program I don't think exists anymore, but can't say enough good things about CIEE. I think they're a fabulous organization, and my sister has done some of their study abroad as well, which is how I actually decided to go with them. But they're really great, and they're really good at placing people and running really excellent programs in my experience.
I concur with that. CIEE is awesome. The language and culture program I did, the structure of it was you fly in. I did a homestay. Other people did apartments. If you can do a homestay, I recommend it. If you can do a homestay with children, highly recommend it. Mine had like adult kids, so like you don't get as much of that. Like some of my friends who had stayed with families, like, oh yeah, you go and play soccer all the time, and you really just kind of get to see daily life. Like, oh, what'd you learn in school today? Okay, we walk through that. So recommend that. So I was in homestay. Our first 2 weeks were learning the local dialect, and at that point they split us into two sections. My section had never taken Arabic before, so we didn't even know how to read and write in it, but we just learned the sounds, which is a fantastic experience. Highly recommend it because that was really, really, really useful. And then once those 2 weeks are done, then you go into a bunch of classes. And so I took classes in 4 languages. So we had I had a modern standard Arabic class, the formal one. I had a Darija, the local dialect. I had a class on the Quran. I had a class on Moroccan culture and society that was in English. And then I had a class that was in French, but was about MENA, history, culture, politics, religion. Basically, so he was like so all these were at the CIEE center. So it wasn't like at a university. We had like a little, a hub. And they would just bring in professors, the great professors from the area. And so his name was Saber. Saber was absolutely incredible. And our French class only had 3 or 4 people. And so he would just ask us, okay, guys, what do you want to learn about? What are you interested in? And so we'd say, oh, I want to learn about this or that. And so he said, okay. And he was always just so excited. So he would go and find just stacks and stacks of materials for us to read through and talk about. And he's like, okay, what'd you think? And we just talked through it in French and English and the dialect and just all of them together. And so everyone usually takes about 4 to 5 classes. And then there are opportunities to volunteer or intern. The intern program, sort of placement program, wasn't quite it. There were some great opportunities for people who wanted to be teachers, to kind of teach English and other things in local schools. Those were great. They had a hard time finding stuff for other people, but definitely a possibility. You just have to work with the staff. The staff are incredible. They will move heaven and earth for you, as they did for me. Like if you don't like your homestay, they will move you. If you want this sort of experience, they will find it for you. But they don't know what to do for you unless you tell them, hey, I want this, I need this. And so if you can identify what that is, they will absolutely do whatever it takes to get you there. And then Sylvia, you said second part of that was describing how you connected to future internships. So the US NATO internship was just through USA Jobs. You just apply and that's it. I had maybe applied 4 months before it. And so, it's just all about crafting that narrative of where you've been, where you are right now, and where you want to go. And about the earlier discussion about linearity, very, very few people, there are no linear paths. They look linear in retrospect because you put them together like that. And that is that's a part of the building the narrative that you have to do. But never feel discouraged when oh, it's not going to work out. No, you just have to figure out how it fits in. So those are my thoughts on that.
That's fantastic to hear. And again, I think this was such a great question to highlight that programs come in lots of different shapes and forms around the world. And although we have, just a sampling of a few countries here, this is certainly replicated around the world. And so if you are interested in internships, that's really something great to be considering right from the get-go, even if you're like just not sure yet, because it may be that there are programs not like the IFE where you have to do the internship, but other opportunities. And Grace, thank you for mentioning too, there are different visa requirements, even for volunteering in certain countries. So again, if those are things of interest, please mention them as you come and meet with global education advisors or others as you're talking to different programs. But it's also something really good to think about if you're working with the Career Center too. I'm actually an alum, and I remember as a freshman writing back in the days letters to alumni around the world, because we have a wonderful alumni network. William & Mary alums are everywhere, and sometimes that has also been a great way for our students to connect to opportunities. And then of course, our wonderful Career Center here on campus, even when you're abroad, is still available as well. So Tanya, is there anything you want to mention in terms of either helping to find internships overseas to the Career Center, or even while you're abroad, still connecting to some of the resources?
I like what you mentioned about contacting the alumni, because I'm a big believer in prospecting as well as applying to what's been posted. We also promote, I want you to think about, it's great to study abroad as a student, but if you are unable to, don't let that be a deterrent, because post-bac experiences are very valid as well. That summer after you graduate, or even a year after you graduate, that's a possibility. CIEE, I've been a big believer in that organization for quite a while, ever since it was introduced to me. And so I support that. Another one that we bring in for information and is BUNAC, BUNAC.org. And they have an internship component as well as a work abroad component. And I just think it's really great to get the support that you need for that. In the center, we have someone who's dedicated to internships. Her title is experiential learning, because we know that internships aren't the only form of experiential learning, and study abroad is definitely proof of that. Research is, shadowing, career chats, micro internships. I mean, you can design what it is that you want if you're motivated to do so, much like a self-designed degree. We can help you design one and then reach out to people with your permission on your behalf and ask if they would be interested in hosting you as an intern. So that's another route as well. It takes a little bit of time, a little more energy, but if you're willing to work with us and dedicate your energy as well, it's worth it. It really is. So I'll stop there. I think that gives people some ideas of how they can use us.
It's always one of the things that we mention too, that while you're abroad, you're still a William & Mary student, and so access to resources, and that even when you graduate, right, and William & Mary is still here for you, and we're all part of this community. So let me see, I don't see any other questions in the chat right now, but I'm just really curious. One of the kind of things that I heard hinted on a little bit, and certainly some of the things that I have talked to Tanya and to others about, is that so much of work can also be about working with others in a variety of different settings, and that finding ways of collaborating or doing group work or having to navigate some of the challenges and opportunities abroad in either formal ways, right, group projects in classes, but also in lots of informal ways, right, whether that be living arrangements or otherwise, can be really important for professional and personal development. Is that something that you have found? And if so, is there anything from study abroad that you think was really relevant to your life now in the kind of collaboration, group work kind of way, formal and informal?
So I can talk a little bit about my experience working at the think tank and getting used to a Russian work environment, which again, I don't want to, draw broad generalizations from my one experience, but I was not anticipating exactly what it would look like to be in a Russian work environment, meaning the hours are very different from the US. So like when I was interning in the US, I was like, okay, I have to be there on time every single day because that's when the day starts. And in Russia, the hours are much more fluid and people get to work a lot later and work a lot later. And I had to get used to that. But I think for me, it was really a lot about learning how to work in an environment where I wasn't speaking my native language and to still build those connections with other people. I'm sorry if my dog is going nuts. And so I was working with a lot of people, some of whom spoke English and some of whom didn't. And I had to really build those connections because I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't know what was going on where I was interning. I didn't know when I was supposed to be there. And so I learned to collaborate. And one of my like best friendships that I built when I was in Russia was with a young woman who was also interning, but she was Russian. And she told me, she was like, when I get really nervous and tired, my English is really bad. And I said, same, but with Russian. And we would go to lunch together and just kind of parse our way through our conversations. And so I'm sorry, Sylvia, this isn't a very clear answer, but I think it's really valuable to be able to navigate an environment in a language that's not your first language. And then to be able to come back to the US and be like, I can do this. This is in English. This is so much easier. Of course I can do this.
Sounds like you had to also figure out what was the work culture of the particular place you were working in and kind of adapt and figure out ways to build connections in different settings.
Exactly.
Anyone else want to speak to any of that?
That was a good point, Grace. Especially with my job now, but also abroad, just being comfortable with the uncomfortable. Just also in a professional setting. You know, you'll be asked to do things that maybe you don't feel as comfortable in, like by your boss, but, you know, just gonna lean into it, you know, own your skills, approach it with confidence. And that's also my job specifically in terms of, I think, like I mentioned earlier, like speaking to witnesses about incidents and speaking to cops in these uncomfortable situations, but you just lean into the awkwardness, own why you're there, own your experiences, and study abroad really helped me with that. So.
Not a whole lot in collaboration, but I'll tell you, learning how to talk to people, learning how to speak to your audience is one of the most valuable things I think anyone can learn. I think study abroad definitely informed that. Like even in terms of language, like I would start with Moroccan Arabic, and then okay, I went as far as I could with that one, and then I switched to French because it's, you know, there's like a 75-25 chance they spoke French rather fluently, and then once I ran out of that, then we'd use an English word. But figuring out, okay, what do people know? What do they need to know? How can I best communicate what I need from like to them from what I know in the way that works best for them? I think is something that's really hard to articulate, as I just did now, but that's kind of the things you pick up as you're going along there, and it's just absolutely invaluable.
Great, thank you all so much. Right, and I, at least for me, I think back to experiences decades ago, and I will say, as one goes through life, my hope for you too is that some of the interactions you've had abroad are like little treasure boxes that you might look back and be like, there are certain incidents where I'm like, oh, I see that from a really different perspective now, as I'm unpacking, like didn't understand what was going on at the moment, but now can see it. So, you know, our hope very much is that this is a part of a lifelong journey. So this has been just really fantastic. I know one of the things that we may have some students who are still exploring different career paths. So I wondered if we could, and we focused a lot about study abroad, but would you mind talking a little bit about what your job now is? Because I think that might also be helpful. We've talked now about how you've gotten there. So I don't know if you'd be willing to just describe in very brief terms, but still the work that you do, just in case there might be students out there who might someday want to pursue careers like yours.
I can start. So I'm an investigator at the Orleans Public Defender's Office. Coming out of William & Mary and after my abroad experience, I knew I wanted to do a career that blended law and social work. And so now I'm still undecided if I want to go to law school or become a social worker. But day to day, my job involves speaking to clients, research, getting records, but mostly it's speaking to witnesses, speaking to clients' family about crimes ranging in various severities. And I really wanted a job like this because I think you can hear my roommate's dog right now. Because I wanted something where I wasn't going to be behind a desk all day. I really needed something that I was like on the go. So like half the day I'm at my desk, the other half I'm like trying to find people or trying to find records. And so that was really important to me, and informs what my next job will be too. And yeah, and actually the job I have now is influenced by William Mary Professor, Professor Nemechek. So if anyone has the honor to take one of her classes, she's awesome. She helped me get my internship that led to this job. So reach out to professors too. They're really helpful in professional areas as well.
So like I said, I am a junior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment, which is a think tank. So they produce all sorts of different research intended for all sorts of different audiences, primarily policymakers, but anyone thinking or working on different issues. And the junior fellowship that I'm doing is a very structured fellowship. It's 1 year, and you have to apply through the university that you attend as an undergraduate to get it. It's only open to graduating seniors or people who are within 1 year of graduation who have yet to start graduate school. There's no requirements about like what you majored in, but there's a lot of different positions within Carnegie that you could work on. So for example, I'm, like I said, on the Russia program, but we have a tech program, which I think would be really interesting if you're perhaps interested in the intersection of STEM with international policy. There's also a lot of different area studies programs and a democracy program. There's also a position where you assist the president of Carnegie. And I believe that applications for this year have closed for the coming year. But I highly, highly encourage anyone interested to check out this program. It's called GAITHER, GAITHER. And it's, like I said, you have to apply through the university normally in the fall of your senior year or the fall of the year after you graduate. But it's a 1 year fellowship, and every day is different. Every day is doing something unpredictable, but it's a lot of really interesting research. I've worked on all sorts of different projects, assisting, doing very formal literature reviews and going through Twitter to see what different people are saying about different things, reading Russian news all the time. It's basically whatever the scholars I work for need most that particular day. But I highly encourage you to look at the program, and please feel free to reach out if you are interested and if you apply in the future, because I think it's an awesome place to be, and Carnegie is a really, really great place to work.
So like I said earlier, I'm a management consultant with Booz Allen Hamilton in DC, and I currently support the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Every day is incredibly different. It just depends on what our office wants and what our policymakers want. It could be go search through all the federal acquisition regulations and find these 30, find whatever you have on like the word proprietary. Or it could be, okay, you need to edit these briefs for SecDef or whatever. It's just whatever they need, we do it, and we do it really, really fast and to the best of our ability. So it's anything ranging from actual policy work to data science, data analysis, streamlining business processes, figuring out how to automate systems, implementing AI, machine learning. So it really depends on where you are, but it is just, I have no idea what I'm going to do next week. It's very exciting and fast paced, and I love it. If anyone is interested in Booz Allen, please reach out. They recruit on campus at William Mary through the Career Center every fall. We would love to hear from you. We'd love to talk to you. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. Always happy to talk with students. And I'll say one last thing about networking. Now that I've entered the working world, networking is everything. The way you get projects within my firm is talking to other people within the firm. And so I talk to a lot of William & Mary people who happen to be at my firm. And so it's incredibly important to maintain these types of relationships. And a lot of them I'll come across, if you're looking into the IC world, it'll be like, oh, you also studied in Morocco. Tell me about your time. And then you kind of talk to them about their projects, and it's just always valuable. But that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Great. Thank you so much. It's always so exciting to have this little insight into what life can be like in different careers. And so I'm hopeful that's helpful for our students as well. And I've just been inspired by you talking about study abroad and the lessons from that, and the kind of connections that you've been able to make with what you're doing and all the successes that you've had, truly living wonderful dreams and seeing that trajectory develop. Can't wait to see your next steps. As Carter said, the linear afterwards, right? In the short term. You know, it's lovely to see you all virtually. We can't wait to see you here on campus again, and look forward to staying in touch. And for those of you who are watching it live or then in the recorded session, we hope this was really helpful to you. We're excited that you're considering study abroad or thinking about the connections with study abroad, and we look forward to connecting with you. So with that, thank you so much, and we hope you have a wonderful weekend ahead, and that 2021 improves, and that global travel will be possible again, more widely again. So thank you. Take care.